Hello and welcome back to our series on Photoshop retouching for students and teachers. In this part 3 video, we're going to cover probably the much anticipated video here, the ability to take and apply digital makeup to smooth out the skin textures. And if you're ready to get into this, let's just hop right into the computer and get started. So, over here in my layers panel, you'll see we have the original image here. We have the area where we removed the blemishes in part 1. In part 2, we whitened the smile. And now we're going to create another layer. We're going to take this layer and we're going to make a copy of it. I use the command or the keyboard shortcut on a Mac, Command Alt J or Command Option J. On Windows, Control Alt J will give us the ability to create a new layer while also giving it a name. And so for this one, I'm just going to call this one Makeup. I'm going to hit OK. And we here have that at the top. So of course, just as a reminder, if you want to see the before and afters, what you'll do is you'll hold down the Alt or Option key. You'll come down to this first layer, the original eyeball, holding down the Alt and Option key, you press this eyeball. That shows you the original image, and this shows you the, with all your edits, all your retouching so far. So, with the makeup layer selected, what we're going to do is come up to the filter menu, and we're going to choose Blur, Gaussian Blur. You're going to get a dialog box that shows up. Make sure that the preview checkbox is selected. And what we'll do is we'll end up dialing in a blur value. So this is way too blurry. It all depends on the resolution of your image. And really, there's no science to this. It's more of an art. I have to say, for me, I'm feeling like 6 might be a good number. Might be too much. You can always try it again. That's the great thing about the digital work that we're doing here. We can always try it again with a different value. But let's go with 6. So I'm going to hit OK with this. Now that's obviously way too much of an effect here. So with this layer active, you see this opacity is selected to be 100. If you have a selection tool active, all you have to do on your keyboard is press one of the number keys. It'll automatically change your opacity. So I'm going to hit the 5 key, is usually where I like to start. And that brings us down to 50% opacity. If you like less of a softening, you can hit 4. Maybe 5 or 4, maybe as low as 3 is where I tend to go. But I'm going to leave it at 50%. Now, you might think this already looks immediately better. And it does. However, what we're doing is we're softening everything on here. So if I just take off this layer, you can see what we've done with this effect, right? What we'd like to do is bring back the crisp focus and detail on the areas like the nose and the teeth and the eyes and the hair. We don't want to blur everything. So to do that, we're going to do a couple of steps. The first step here is to make sure that we go to the layer below it and activate that one. What we're going to then do is with our selection tool, I'll use the rectangular marquee tool. I'm going to select an area of areas of the face. So I'm going to click and drag here to create a little box to select this area of her right cheek. And then I'm going to come over and do the same thing here, being sure not to get too far into the shadows. And I'm going to do the same thing, holding the shift key down to add to the selections here on the chin. So now I've got these 3 spots here selected. I'm going to go up to the select menu and I'm going to go to the modify. Nope, sorry. I'm going down to the similar. I want to select similar pixels. Okay. So now the beauty of this is we're going to tell Photoshop what we want and what we don't want, and it doesn't have to be precise. So I'll go over to the lasso tool and I don't want this hair selected. So I'm going to hold down the Alt or Option key and I'm going to click and drag around this hair here. And I've deselected the hair. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to shift click and drag the areas that I do want to soften. So I'm going to come around here like this, get the jawline, the neck. Like I said, this doesn't need to be perfect. It's pretty forgiving. And then continue up this way. Like that. We're going to grab the chin as well. That's fine the way that is. Let's not also forget about this area down here. Want to get the rest of her arm. Okay, so that's a pretty rough selection. You can go more precise if you'd like over here, but I'm going to leave it like this. And we can always use the brush later to fix this. So with our selection like this, where we've selected the skin the way we want, I'm going to go back to the select menu and we're going to go over to modify. We're going to choose feather. Now this is where it's important to remember that initial value that we said we were going to use with our blur. I believe that I said I was going to use a 6. So I'm going to type in 6 and I'm going to feather it the same amount that I blurred. Okay, that's softened our selection. What I'm going to do now is go back to the makeup layer with that active and our selection still active. I'm going to come down to this option right here, which is the add layer mask. All right, that did a lot of the work for us. So over here we have our layer mask with the whole white reveals and the black conceals thing. So the areas that are black in this mask, that's going to be where the blur is not applied. The areas that are white is where the blur is applied, right? And so we can show this by, if I hold down the shift key and click on the mask, that'll disable the mask. This will enable the mask. You'll notice that the hair comes back in focus. The eyes come back in focus, right? So now, just to make some modifications to check things out, we're going to go over to the brush tool. And mode is set to normal. It's a soft brush. You can take your opacity down to 50%. Is where I like to go with this one. And what I'll normally do is with black selected as my foreground color, and here in this case white is, so I can hit the X key to swap my foreground and background colors. And if they're not the default black or white, you can hit the D key on the keyboard to set them back to the default colors. So with black selected, I like to come in, I'm going to zoom in here, and I'm going to paint in the areas that I know I want definitely to be back in focus. So I'm going to paint over the eye, paint over the eyebrow. Now these areas were already masked out. I often will do the nostrils, around the nose, the smile lines here, these creases. That becomes a little crisper. I'm going to go over the mouth as well. Okay, so just to give you an example of what it would be like to bring back the texture, if I continue to paint over this chin, you'll see how it comes back. Right? So I don't want that. I'm going to undo a couple times, and that brings back the softness on the skin. So let's zoom back out, and I'm going to Alt Option click on this eyeball in our original layer, and we'll see the difference. This is the before. This is after with our removing of the blemishes, the retouching, the brightening of the smile, and the makeup. One more time. Before. After. If you like this, stay tuned. We have another video coming up where we can play with the color of the eyes to make the color of the eye pop a little more. And I just might include, if you felt like it, adjusting the color of the lips as well. Thank you for joining us on our Part 3 video on portrait retouching for students and teachers using Photoshop.